welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join this webinar. Over the next hour or so, we're going to cover the topic that's on the title slide, and that is using a clinical quality risk management process to implement risk-based monitoring. Why don't we go ahead and we'll get right into it. So again, over the next 40 minutes or so of the time that we'll spend presenting slides, we're going to cover the following topics. I will cover a brief overview of risk-based monitoring, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Fetterman, who will talk about quality risk management and risk assessment in much more detail. And along with that, we'll present a case study, a relevant case study, and then we'll wrap up the presentation with some recommendations on implementing a seamless process. And again, we'll leave time at the end of the presentation for some questions and a question and answer session. Okay, so why don't we'll get into it. Again, risk-based monitoring is not a new concept. It's been around for a few years now, and I know probably a lot of the folks on the phone on the webinar are familiar with risk-based monitoring. So I'm just going to provide some background information to set the foundation for the rest of the discussion today, or the rest of the presentation. So on this slide, what is risk-based monitoring? Well, risk-based monitoring is an adaptive approach to monitoring that uses risk evaluation and principles of risk management to develop a customized plan that may involve a number of different monitoring strategies, such as what's listed here, on-site monitoring, remote monitoring, and centralized monitoring, really to focus efforts in your clinical trial on those items that are most critical to the outcome of the study, what's most critical to patient safety and data integrity. And as we see it, there are three keys to enabling risk-based monitoring, and that is the first one is targeting the correct risks, and through a systematic and rigorous process, we think you can accomplish that. And then once you have that, the next step would be to enable a continuous analytics of study data and site data to help assess the risks that are ongoing in your clinical trial. And then lastly, deploying a team members who are skilled at risk-based data interpretation and decision-making. Ultimately, having people interpret the data and make the correct decisions and take the appropriate actions in the life cycle of your clinical trial. Okay, so in terms of goals of your risk-based monitoring program, these really aren't too different than the goals of using a traditional approach to monitoring, and that is we want to, of course, ensure that we enhance human subject protection and generate high-quality clinical trial data. What may be different with a risk-based approach is, I think, the last 4 bullet points, and that is using risk-based monitoring. You want to be able to detect potential safety signals or significant issues as soon as possible. And using the principles of a risk-based monitoring program, we believe you can do that much better than using what traditional approaches. I think this next bullet point is really important in terms of reducing or eliminating systematic error. I'm sure many of us probably have experience where some type of error, some type of issue or has crept into a clinical trial, and it's something that is systematic systemic, and could infect the clinical trial. So if the goal ultimately is to identify those errors as soon as possible and eliminate them, so you can so you don't run the risk of the trial going south. Also, you want to use your resources efficiently. That's another important goal of risk-based monitoring. And finally, you want to implement timely and effective risk mitigation strategies with your clinical trial. So this slide summarizes the regulatory guidance, and the FDA, the MHRA, and the EMA have all weighed in terms of providing guidance to the industry. I think all of them are in agreement of there are a number of different methods for providing oversight, and I think all of them provide guidance to and have actually encouraged using a risk-based approach by establishing common parameters. In many ways, the regulatory authorities are actually leading the effort with helping the industry implement a risk-based approach. I'm sure many folks on the line are familiar with Transcelerate, and Transcelerate is an organization, it's a nonprofit that involves members from the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry, and they've been helpful in providing a standardized approach to risk-based monitoring, among other initiatives that they have that are listed here. I'm sure many of you are aware of they've released position papers and provided some updates that have been extremely helpful. And they're working closely with the regulatory agencies and, of course, the member companies to help, again, provide a standardized approach to risk-based monitoring.